Hey guys, Danny Gusson with Danny Gusson Fitness Podcast here. We have Josh Romero. Josh is one of our best trainers here. Josh, I'm going to let you just mention a quick few plugs, as you mentioned it earlier, about your strength, because sometimes people look at you, as you've mentioned, and think, oh, this guy's short, he's a short king, as you've said it, right? But you're actually super strong, so you're very qualified to be leading the way on this particular subject we're going to cover today. So give some of your big numbers here, so for context.
For sure. So I appreciate that, first off. So my squat is going to be a 315 one rep max. My bench press is 175. And then my deadlift is 325 pounds. That's my favorite lift of all time. Overhead press for barbell is gonna be 155 pounds seated. So pretty strong. And
tell your chin-ups too.
My chin-ups, I can load up with maybe 55 pounds for a good 6 reps loaded on my waist. I mean, you know this too, real quick. I don't want to draw this out, but bench pressing 80-pound dumbbells and dislocated my wrist.
Jacked up your wrist, yeah.
And I knew I had to go see.
So he is human.
Yeah, but I knew I had to go see the doc, and I knew that, but I also had to finish my workout. So halfway through, I just wrapped it up real quick, and I'm a strong believer of just kind of mentally pushing yourself, whatever that looks like. So I'm still training with a kind of messed up wrist right now, but we won't let that stop us.
That's right. You know? So again, thank you for that, because again, that context is super important for the topic we're going to be covering today, which is compound versus isolation exercises, ChatGPT's top 5 questions answered by me and Josh. So the questions are, which is better for building muscle, isolation or compound exercises? Should beginners focus more on compound or isolation movements? How do isolation exercises fit into a strength training program? Can isolation exercises help fix muscular imbalances? And are compound exercises enough, or do you need isolation movements for optimal results? So this was a really great podcast. Josh and I are mostly on the same page, but do have some different takes on different things, which I think made this interesting. We both learned from each other. And at the end, I broke down a practical way to navigate the differences between isolation and compound exercises in a way that everyone here can action on and start implementing in your workouts today. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Josh.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
All right. We're doing it.
Awesome.
So today was your idea, Josh. Once again, you had the idea that you wanted to discuss the differences between compound exercises and isolation exercises.
Yes.
Where did you come up with that idea?
I mean, with my background with training, I found there's certain cycles and waves for both of them, and not excluding one versus the other. One might have more kind of prevalence at a certain phase than the other. And I don't know, I'm interested to get your takeaway to see what kind of we both agree on and what we might kind of clash heads on and see different philosophies.
That'd be fun.
So hopefully we can find some good middle ground with whatever this ends up looking like. So I'm excited for today.
I'm sure we will. Yeah. So the title for this podcast, which is unofficial at this point in time, but we were thinking it'd be cool to kind of look at this through the lens of ChatGPT's top 5 questions around compound versus isolation exercises. Shout out to my friend Dr. Jerry Robles. I was on his podcast a couple months ago, and he kind of inspired this idea of using ChatGPT to kind of guide the process. So it actually spit out some really great questions here. So I'll let you kick it off. So I'll read the first one and you lead the way. So number 1, which is better for building muscle, isolation or compound exercises?
All right. So I think this is a really good one, because isolation exercises, you can really, if someone's really in tune with those muscle fibers, you can feel them fire on all cylinders.
Real quick.
Yeah.
We should probably clarify what compound versus isolation exercises are.
Definitely,
real quick, right? Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I can do it, and then maybe I can get your term
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and balance back and forth. So for me, isolation exercises. I'm gonna have a trouble.
Say
It's a
say that
bad
3 times fast.
isolation exercises. Exercise. See, there we go. All right. So, anyways, the isolation movements, right, are for me at least things centered around targeting that one single muscle group, right? So machines are really good for that. Say maybe your chest and your traps are sore, but you still want to hit that lower part of that back. You don't want to do something like a compound lift, like a heavy deadlift. You can take it to something like a row machine, an isolation exercise, where you can really just target and pinpoint that one individual muscle and mitigate some of the other motions because they're still probably going to get involved, right? Same thing with cables. They can really just dial in on those one specific muscle groups. And then things like compound lifts are going to be your bench press, your deadlifts, your squats, right? Things that involve more than one like global muscle groups, right? So like for a deadlift, your back.
Global meaning keeping in mind the whole body.
Exactly. Yeah. And so your back is going to get involved with a deadlift, but so are your glutes, your hamstrings, quads, core. Everything's going to get involved, right? A bench press. Yeah, you're laying down and your chest is doing the work, but the forearms are getting engaged, the biceps, the triceps, everything's fired up on all cylinders to get that going, right? And that's my takeaway. Would you say that's pretty kind of spot on, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a good description. I would say, not to add too much more, just compound exercises are exercises that involve multiple muscle groups, multiple joints. Isolation exercises involve one muscle group, one joint. So a compound movement involving the legs would be a squat or deadlift. An isolation exercise would be like a leg extension because
Yeah.
you're only activating your quadricep, you're only using your knee joint, right?
Yeah.
Or in the case of the squat, you're using your glutes, your hamstrings, your adductors, your quads, knee joint, ankle joint, hip joint, right? So compound isolation, same thing with the chest, right? Bench press, you're pressing forward. It's pecs, it's triceps, it's anterior delts, it's even some lats, right? That's your shoulder joint, it's your elbow joint, right?
Yes.
So it's even your scapula, which is a joint, right? Whereas a pec fly is primarily just your shoulder joint moving. You're not moving at the elbow joint, right?
Yeah.
So again, just to kind of summarize that succinctly, compound is multiple joints, multiple muscles. Isolation is one muscle, one joint,
Yeah.
right? So bringing it back to the question, which is better for building muscle, isolation or compound exercises?
Yeah, so back to that one, and it's good I had time to really think and sit on that question too, is I think if programmed appropriately, isolation probably might reign a little more supreme in certain cases because if you're able to do some type of split where you're hitting the muscle group 2 to 3 times. So in high school, my old school split was chest and back on Monday, Tuesday was full arms, Wednesday was legs, and then I repeated that. So I did a 6-day split with 1 day off. I was able to hit isolation exercises and not really burn out as much, knowing my chest and my back were sore, and then Tuesday rolls around and I can do my delts, my biceps, my triceps, right? And variables that I can accomplish with that are safer too is I can hit a bicep curl with some type of cable setup to really fire this up and not get my neck or my traps engaged, right? Or my lower back as I'm trying to curl that up to muscle failure. Whereas in a way you can do that with compound lifts, but the risk if something's sore or something's over fatigued and you're going back around and hit those other muscle groups is maybe you tweak something or twinge something in the process. It's mitigated with isolation exercises for the most part, unless you're a knucklehead.
I like
right?
what you're saying about you're actually taking isolation a step further, where again, the technical definition is just one joint, one muscle.
Yeah.
You're even saying, like, so for example, a barbell curl is technically still an isolation exercise.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, but you're even saying that in some cases you like to modify that even further because even with a barbell curl, you're standing on your legs, you're having to brace your core, you might even have to engage your lower back,
Yeah.
depending on how heavy it is. Whereas if you can take some of even those variables out, doing it seated or doing it however,
Yeah.
right? Then that's even further isolating the variables.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, one of the heavy variables for muscle growth is leaning into like eccentrics, the negative, which is almost always the hardest part of the lift, where the muscle is almost the most lengthened with the most amount of tension from that weight, right? And so for a barbell bicep curl, it's a great exercise. I'm not dismissing that. But to be able to get down to that negative without anything buckling, like maybe your wrist collapsing, right? Not that like it's going to hurt you or anything, but like muscle failure means I can't get that back up. Well, a cable is going to have you get into different angles to modify that on the fly to really just burn out. On top of another variable is, hey, I'm right next to the cable. I can drop that weight and superset that faster than taking plates off of a bar and going into that. So you keep up with that trend of feeling that pump, which is the blood flow in the muscle to feed it with nutrients to get it to grow in the first place.
Yeah.
You know?
I like that. You're kind of talking about how there is actually even certain equipment and certain tools that are better suited for isolation, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like to an extent you're making an argument for the fact that using cables, or I would say in the case of your dumbbell example, or sorry, your bicep curl example, dumbbells even, right, are going to allow you to get into that more full range of motion, and play to where your body's actually at, versus again the barbell is going to be a little bit more limiting in that way. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean that's my takeaway. Not to discredit free weights or compound lifts, because on the flip side, right, they're good if you play your cards right, but I'd say it's a little more, you got to be dialed in, right? Like you can't go to that level of exhaustion and do that kind of 6-day split hitting free weights if you're doing an hour and a half workout. Whereas, like I said, if I have a certain split, like my chest and back on Monday, and it's all free isolation exercises, right? I know this is going to be sore and the back's going to be sore, but my arms are going to be fresh, right? If I hit a free weight, well, I can load up a lot heavier because I know multiple muscle groups are going to get engaged. So my back is going to be able to handle a 300-pound deadlift. But on the flip side, the load to the muscle ratio, like, yeah, the back is a bigger muscle group and it can handle that, but it also dishes that back out, at least in my case, for soreness. So if I lift 300 pounds, I'm going to expect to be sore for about a day or 2 days. So it wouldn't be smart to hit that muscle the next day. So I'm missing out on frequency at that point, which is also optimal for muscle growth, right? But like I said, you're getting the biggest capacity or biggest bang for your buck with something like that, where 300-pound deadlift versus something
real quick, how much do you weigh, Josh?
130 pounds.
So 130 pounds. This guy's lifting 300-pound deadlift.
Got to put a little plug in that, right? 325 though.
325. That's the one rep.
That's my one rep max,
okay.
right? But okay,
it's impressive.
So 325 pounds on a deadlift. That's gonna do some damage to the muscles involved, the back, the lats, right, the biceps, everything, the core, versus a 20-pound dumbbell that I'm rowing on the side, right? The load is just significantly higher in that scenario. So in that way, for me, I always say your muscle has no option but to either grow or get stronger in that case, you know?
Yeah.
So I just want to hear your takeaway on that too.
Yeah, those are a lot of great points. Again, maybe I'm going to try to stick with just kind of adding a more just kind of like shortened answer, because I think you touched on a lot of important topics there.
I bounced around, I know.
No, it's good. No, so I feel like I don't need to take people on my ride, right?
Yeah.
So I would say, just to summarize, in my opinion, compound exercises, I think for most people, so I have a slightly different opinion than you. I think compound exercises for most people are more important for building muscle. And the reason why I believe that is because so whether you're doing an isolation exercise or a compound exercise, you need to work at an intensity that's exhausting, right? And I think how likely you are going to be exhausted after doing a compound exercise is going to be on average much higher than an isolation exercise. So for example, think of the way you feel after doing like weighted chin-ups for 6 reps.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to go right back to that. Right? Maybe
Yeah.
30 seconds goes by, maybe a minute goes by, and you don't necessarily want to go back to that, right?
Yeah.
Where we've both had that feeling probably of hitting an isolation exercise, like let's say cable kickbacks,
Yeah.
right? Dumbbell curls, where you kind of feel you have it in you to get back to it again 30 seconds later, even if you took it to muscular failure.
Yeah.
Right? So the way I look at that is I try to remind myself of the fact that muscle building is adaptation,
Yes,
right? We're
yeah.
adapting to stimulus that we're presenting to ourselves. And so I like to think of compound exercises or anytime you're working to exhaustion as like your body grabbing a megaphone and talking to your muscles and just saying, grow,
Yeah.
right? Like it's a loud message, right? Where I think in some cases, when you're hitting the isolation exercises where you tend not to feel quite as exhausted afterwards,
Yeah.
again, you could kind of get right back to it fairly quickly. I feel
Yeah.
that message is a little softer,
Yeah.
right? Now, that being said, so to wrap that point up, I think compound exercises tend to exhaust us more, which
Yeah.
is going to exhaust the body overall more because it's involving more muscles.
Yeah.
So the message to from your brain to your central nervous system to your hormonal system is going to be, that was really rough.
Yeah.
We need to respond. Now, that being said, the benefit of isolation exercises is there are going to be times where you're going to do a bench press, for example, and maybe, you didn't really hit your triceps all that much. Your pecs and your lats and your shoulders did a lot of the work. And so you may never really target the triceps enough just through only doing pushing motions to really get sufficient growth out of the triceps, where you may need to program for that
Yeah.
as you go along, right? So I think isolation exercises are really important for targeting things that were not targeted by compound movements. So that would be what I'd add to it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. And I think the trouble I see with isolation exercises is I feel like you need to really be in tune with your body and have that mind muscle connection,
That's a great segue into our next point, which is, should beginners focus more on compound or isolation movements?
Man, that's a good one right there. I'm taking this from the approach of how I train people. And so usually what I would do is maybe warm up with isolation exercises because I know I can control the variables of what muscle I want them to feel in that case, and then transition them to the bigger compound lifts, right? Say we're trying to hit, like you said, that bench press. A lot of things I've came across is they don't feel the chest activate. No matter how I'm trying to tweak their form and adjust it, they just modify the weights, modify the bars, right? And they just can't feel that. Well, I can take them to something like the machine flies, and maybe adjusting the seat height and then the angle that they're hitting. Maybe they go further out than that. Maybe their shoulders acting up and they got to go a little closer. And then we can go time under tension, maybe a 3-second eccentric. And almost always we know we're going to hit those muscles that we're trying to target. And then we go back to the compound lift, and it's kind of night and day from that. To where they felt that burn fire up, and it was kind of always there. They just didn't have that mind-muscle connection to focus on that.
Like a pre-activation.
Exactly, yeah, pre-activation. And so to that end, that's where I'd say the isolation exercise, for me, is where it works the best. And coming from the correctional standpoint, we always look at, hey, what muscles are overactive? You need to lengthen those by stretching those out. What muscles are underactive? You need to isolate those. And it doesn't have to be cable stuff. It can be like I said, little correctional stuff with bands. Maybe your glutes need to be fired up for a squat, so you do a monster walk with some bands around the knees, right? And then once those are fired up and you do that enough times, maybe the next session we integrate.
Yeah.
And then we do the compound lifts.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't feel comfortable having you do a compound lift, knowing it's a good exercise like a deadlift, but you're not engaging your hamstrings and glutes as much as we want, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe your traps are rolling into it, and now you're feeling that all in the neck.
Yeah.
Then we got to take a step back and kind of break that down and see what needs to get isolated, you know?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
what's your takeaway?
Well, I like what you were just saying about, so the term you were just, the type of warm-up you were just describing is called low load activation. So low load activation, for those who don't know, it's just the idea that you're, prior to you getting into your main lifts for a workout, you are going to isolate to an extent certain muscle groups that you really want contribution from for that day. So
Yeah.
to Josh's point, let's say it's important to you to build up your glutes and you're planning on deadlifting or hip thrusting or squatting, whatever, for that day. But you've been sitting all day long, right? You know, we've talked about this point before when Dr. Joe's been on the podcast. I have this theory that, and it's backed by science as well, although I'd love to see more on this, that the amount of muscular activation we're getting from our brain to our central nervous system to our muscles kind of can vacillate throughout the day, right? And so if the glute engagement at the beginning of your day was like, let's say 8 out of 10, after sitting for all day for work for 10 hours, let's say, now maybe that glute engagement is at a 5.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you start your warm-up or your workout, rather than just jumping straight into deadlifts or squats, like Josh is saying, you can do something like some monster walks or some glute bridges with holds at the top with low weight to really just reacclimate that muscle, turn that back on, bring it back from that 5 to a 6, 7, 8, 9. So that way when you're doing a deadlift, if your goal is to build your glutes, you're actually getting your glutes, right? And not getting too much hamstring or too much quad, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's great for beginners because a lot of the times, this is a point later, so I won't go too much into it, but a lot of the times beginners are kind of have that like newborn baby deer syndrome, right? Where they don't quite know how to use their body, right? And so that's where I think, to your point, isolation exercises can be helpful to just kind of break things down a little bit, right? Where compound movements can sometimes be too much at once.
Yeah.
And you touched on machines earlier. That's always a great opportunity for newbies too, is you can do compound movements like a leg press, which uses multiple muscle groups, multiple joints, but it might be easier to start with that than like a barbell squat, let's say.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I think the downside to isolation exercises with beginners is sometimes they don't have enough experience to really have that mind-muscle connection.
Yeah.
So you could do all the things you want to try to say, hey, do you feel it? Do you feel it? Do you feel it? And you might just keep getting the answer no.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas I think someone more seasoned, you come in and help them tweak their form. Hey, do you feel it? And they may respond quicker.
Yeah.
So if you're using feeling the muscle as the sort of benchmark of whether or not an exercise is effective, you may be disappointed as a beginner.
Yeah.
Right? So that would be the one thing that I'd add to that. But and on most of those points, I agree.
Yeah.
So do you have any?
I agree with the beginner, and that's what all these questions are probably going to stem back to is what's your level of expertise too? You know, I've been
And that there's nuance to every single one of these.
exactly like me training since high school. Not that I know every trick in the book, but I can manipulate the workout on the fly. And especially, I mean, we know even say our
You're just so
equipment's-
manipulative, Josh.
Yeah, but say, let me bounce back. Say our
I just threw you off.
Our exercises, right? You have that game plan because I program for myself now, right? I have that game plan of the motion and the workout I want to do, but we know when we go hit those weights, someone's going to take up some equipment we want. So, like I said, in my brain, it's firing up that, okay, I know I can't hit that exercise or that machine or whatever that was that I wanted to get to, but I know this similar motion that if I tweak it this way or if I change the hand placement or the handle or the weights, I can feel that same muscle as if it were like a deadlift or like a chin-up or whatever that is, you know, where some people might not know and have that intuition just because of the lack of experience, you know?
I 100% agree with that.
Definitely
Awesome.
so.
So number 3 is, how do isolation exercises fit into a strength training program?
I would say,
That kind of, we've
yeah,
already touched on it a little bit.
yeah. For me, I like the reverse effect of kind of like what we just talked about, meaning, hey, if something's underactive and I want to fire it up, let me hit the flies, right, to get that pre-activated. Well, what if I hit something like a heavy compound lift, weighted chin-ups, right? My biceps are going to get involved, my lats, everything's going to get involved. And so if I know my biceps are targeted, then I can go isolate and superset after that with maybe some isolation curls or something like that, eccentrics, right? So that's how I play my cards with when it comes to building strength. Because even if it's more endurance based of like, hey, I'm burning out after a chin up, it's still adapting to that stimulus to be able to do one more rep. And then maybe next week I change the rep count and just the whole setup. I'd still do the same exercises, but maybe I go faster, right? That's still getting stronger. If you're able to do the same amount of load faster,
That's true.
wouldn't you be stronger in that capacity, right? I think so.
At least you're getting more fit overall.
Exactly,
Right? Your
yeah.
ability to recover, endurance.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's your takeaway on that?
It's very similar. And we kind of touched on it already. This is why it's going to be easy to answer this question. As far as like when someone says, how does it fit into a program? I think what is easiest for the average person to visualize is like imagining like maybe like a dry erase board here.
Yeah.
Right. And your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are bullet points. And you're saying, here's where I'm starting. I'm warming up. Maybe I'm walking for 5 minutes or whatever. And then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. So that's kind of what I think of when I think of in this question programs. Because to answer the question, like a full comprehensive program, meaning like week to week, month to month, that's a little kind of a longer question to answer.
Yeah.
But as far as just looking at it this way, I think starting off with low load activation exercises, which tend to be more isolation in nature,
Yeah.
right? To just get the muscles you want fired up for
Yeah.
the day so that not only you're targeting those muscles more effectively, but also being more safe throughout your workout.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how much you've seen this, but one of the reasons I always tend to use low load activation when I'm hitting lower body, especially with my middle-aged clients who are desk jockeys especially, is because a big reason why they're here is staying healthy and injury-free.
Yeah.
Right? And if they have a goal to lift heavier with squats or heavier with deadlifts, etc., and their glutes aren't active, then that just means their lower back is going to be working that much harder.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not always just about, hey, bodybuilding, right? Is the
Yeah.
muscle getting that fatigue pump? That's important for a
Yeah.
number of reasons, but for the average person, I think it's more just about health.
Yeah.
So in that case, using those load activations, so it's a lower body day, you got like monster walks or glute bridges with like a hold or something, resistance
Yeah.
band side steps, things like that,
Yeah.
to kind of kick it off. And then that's when I like to get into my compound movements.
Yeah.
So, hey, we're ready to go. Let's do those movements that are going to have the loudest impact, and then use the isolation exercises at the end to touch on whatever we need to. So
Yeah.
in that example of, you're doing, we've used bench press a few times, so we'll use a different one. Like, let's say lat pull down, for example, right? We're using the cable, we squeeze down. Maybe my lats are getting a good workout, right? But maybe my biceps really didn't feel enough of a workout from that, right? So I program, and it's important for me to build my biceps, right? And so having isolation exercises at the end to make up for that,
Yeah.
so that I get when I need to,
Yeah.
right? Like you kind of applied the burnout set,
Yeah.
right? You can get that stuff you need to just to make sure that, if not physiologically, at least psychologically, you
Yeah.
can walk away from the workout just feeling like good.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how often you've had this, but I've had clients over the years where I know they cooked their triceps
Yeah.
in the workout, especially women. That's really important to them. A lot of women and men,
Yeah.
right? I just get more funny comments about the triceps with women, right?
I do too.
The flags,
I got a
the
lady,
bat wings.
The bat wings, yeah. That's what I kind of adopted from one of my clients too. First time I heard it from her, and I was like, oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
I guess I'm
right.
gonna steal that.
It's a funny
You gotta be
visual.
careful who you tell that to. You can't just go saying, hey, we're gonna train your bat wings.
So yeah, train your bat. Yeah, that part. Yeah,
you get slapped in the face.
Exactly. So yeah, so in that case, I know she's or he is totally good on their triceps, but as their trainer, I may have them do a little bit more to isolate the triceps, just to have them psychologically feel they left it all on the table.
Yeah, definitely.
And, like we've talked about before on this podcast, who's to say what that benefit is of that like placebo effect? Even if it's not necessarily doing something physiologically, if it is making you feel good psychologically, who's to say what the long-term benefits of that are?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And from a safety standpoint, I mean, like, if say I got someone that's so dead set on compound lifts, something like an overhead tricep extension with like a dumbbell, right? Just like you're saying, if you had that client burnt out on their triceps, me being the trainer kind of wouldn't feel comfortable having you put 30 pounds over your head if we know that you're burnt out. So what might that look like? Maybe a single arm cable tricep extension, right?
Yeah, like a kickback.
Kickback, knowing that we're going to hit that same muscle group, but a lot safer and peace of mind for them. Because sometimes, I don't know if you've had that where he's throwing exercise in, knowing that they're burnt out, and they look at you sideways like, I don't know if this is safe for me right now.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
it's like, okay, I can catch that. I can feel the vibe. Let's shift it. There's nothing wrong with that. Let's do something something isolating for that muscle group instead.
Yeah, or again, even further isolating to your point, right? And you've mentioned that earlier. So, and this is again where the nuance comes in, which is, for me, I think one of the more fun things to talk about, right? Having this be more second nature for us is, to your point, maybe one of your first isolation exercises is like an overhead extension, right? Mm-hmm. Right? And is it isolation? Yes, it is, because you're technically still mainly isolating. You're keeping your shoulders fixed and isolating the elbow and the tricep, right?
Yeah.
But again, to your point, if you're already pretty smoked, even just doing that might be a little bit too much.
Yeah.
Where you still may have a little gas left in the tank. So doing something like you said, where you're just doing this, I mean, there's nothing else that's going to keep you from doing that other than just your triceps, right? So even the placement of isolation exercises in a program can have nuance too.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. I guess one more thing that's a little bit more, I would say, higher level on isolation exercises before we move on from that point is there are things called pre-exhaustion techniques. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with those?
I might use them. I might not know the technical term.
Yeah. I think I have seen you do these before. So pre-exhaustion technique is where you would use an isolation exercise first and then do your compound lift.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So like, let's say, for example, set of 15 on leg extensions to just fry your quads.
Yeah.
Immediately go to a squat.
Yeah.
Obviously, you would use less with your squat at that point than you would normally use. But the benefits of pre-isolation, what did I just say? Pre-exhaustion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pre-exhaustion techniques is, let's say your body's starting to feel a little beaten up from months of weight training, but you still want to get that feel of exhausting the muscle, working hard. You can use lighter loads and still take your body to that point of exhaustion and still yield those muscle building results.
Yeah.
But give your joints a little bit of a break, right?
Yeah.
Because if you hit heavy leg extensions right before you do squats, you're going to be a bit more fatigued to begin with, but you're still going to, muscle failure is muscle failure, right? So if normally you squat 200 pounds, but in this case you're squatting 150, you're still taking it to fatigue, right? So you're still going to get that benefit, but with lighter loads overall, which is going to be good in the cases that either A, your body's just feeling a little beaten up and you want to kind of take lighter loads to give your joints a break, or you're a seasoned lifter and you're just kind of bored and want to do something different, right? I would say those are the two main reasons I would incorporate exhaustion techniques.
I think back to one of the other questions, I was kind of getting to that, but you kind of cleaned it up there, so I want to circle back, is That's how I would consider the strength part of putting in isolation exercises. Because yeah, we know like, okay, if I did my leg extension and then I go hit my quads and I do a heavy back squat, I wouldn't be able to handle that load I normally would with fresh legs. But at the same, I mean, this is where you really get into being a seasoned lifter. Is like nothing is stopping me from making the attempt of a normal squat day with that normal number that I usually would hit. Say it's 250, right? Isn't that strength training too? If I was able to add in something completely extra to smoke my quads and still hit those reps, it's going to be super hard and a super challenging workout. But to be able to do that after that pre-exhaustion, that's where the strength training part can kick in. And I've done that with some clients too that love that concept of, hey, last week we did this exercise separately and you hit these numbers. This week, we supersetted that with another chest exercise and we saw you struggle, but you still hit 10 reps with that or whatever rep range with that, you know? So sometimes it doesn't always have to be. I mean, I get what you mean of like, you're going to be a little more smoked. So caution says, hey, drop the weight down. You're not trying to impress anybody. But you can also take it to that next limit to say, let's really see what this muscle can do today, you know?
Yeah.
And that's where, like I said, that's the nuance part of like knowing your body. Where I wouldn't expect and ask my clients to do that on their own, but if we were together or for myself, right, that's where I would take that and kind of and smoke myself, like tricep push down, 25 reps with tricep push downs, and then do like a heavy bench press.
Yeah.
Knowing my triceps are going to be smoked from that, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and to your point, that's definitely for more advanced lifters.
Oh, hands down.
Because what's kind of cool about that, I think badass about that concept is, one, you could, again, bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier about just being more fit. Excuse me. Is that the best way to train if you're just purely trying to build raw strength?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
No. Yeah.
But if your goal is to just be more fit, right, be able to do more over the course of a session, recover faster, etc., absolutely, that is going to be the place. And talk about the mental toughness to do something like that, right? You know, like, for example, every once in a while, you can do 6 reps maybe with 200-something pounds, right? And then you do the leg extensions first, and you're still making it your goal to do that.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe you just keep the bar on your back until you're done.
Yeah.
If that means you rest 20 seconds in between each rep and you still do it.
Yeah.
Those are the types of grueling exercises which I would imagine have to be yielding great muscle building effects.
Oh, hands
but
down.
But even greater than that is the mental toughness associated with that, physical toughness to know what you're capable of at times. And I think one of the greatest things we offer sometimes as trainers is helping people realize what they're really capable of, really what their limits are.
Yeah.
And kind of, again, kind of taking this, but also bringing it back to isolation exercises, but on the topic of mental toughness. That is, again, another benefit, I think, of those burnout sets with isolation exercises, because someone might just be ready to say, peace, I'm done, great workout today. But then you say, hey, no. Let's see what you can, we're not quite done.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, I am done. And then you're like, no. You got this. And you coach them through 20, maybe even 30 reps, and they're like, But you know, the best part about that is when someone is ready for something like that, aren't they always smiling through it?
Yeah.
Right? Like they get done and they're like, they're smiling. Then endorphins are just surging because they know they did something exceptional, you know, relative to their own fitness. And so, again, so much nuance to this, which is why it's such a cool topic. This is a big one for us, you being corrective exercise certified and me as well. Can isolate, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, can isolation exercises help fix muscular imbalances?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's kind of what
it's like the premise.
That's the whole concept of correctional exercise is identifying what needs to get isolated. And one of the biggest ways, kind of like the only ways to isolate that with those type of motions and movements, right? Like we were talking about a deadlift, if your lower back fires up too much, and we notice that as trainers, I want your glutes to get stronger. So I gotta stop that kind of then and there. It's not that the deadlift was a bad exercise. It's just, hey, we need to strengthen the glutes.
Yeah.
And we can do that knowing that. So that's why I personally like the idea of going and doing compound lifts for within reason. I'm not going to load it up for 1 rep maxes, but just seeing what people can't do.
Yeah.
So, because that's going to give me more info than just going straight to isolation exercise. So let's see a kind of collective exercise where we know the kind of green lights of what is a good rep. And then whatever I see, maybe the knees cave in, so we got to strengthen your abductors, right? Then we can take you to the machine and work on that. Or maybe we can put like a medicine ball between the thighs and have you squeeze that. But I kind of wouldn't know that if I just put you on isolation exercises in the first place.
That's actually a great point.
Right.
Compound exercises are in many cases a much better diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
Right? Which hence why even in the most basic personal training certification, they're going to talk about the overhead squat assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the whole idea, for those who don't know, the overhead squat assessment is you squat with your arms over your head. Right? Sounds simple enough, but the whole point is there's a lot that can go wrong.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the idea is if you're looking for potential muscular imbalances, which essentially is the whole point of corrective exercise. So just to quickly touch on that, we have in previous videos, but I can do it real quick. Corrective exercise essentially is just a type of personal training certification where you're able to easily address muscular imbalances that are going to contribute to movement faults where your body doesn't move quite the way it's supposed to, which is not only going to make you more susceptible to injury, but it's going to make you weaker too.
Yeah.
Right? So in that case, I would say that the diagnostic, that our overhead squat assessment is like fishing with a net.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you're bound to catch something, right?
Yeah.
You just may have to, be patient. Where spear fishing, it's like, hey, do this isolation exercise. Do this isolation exercise. You're gonna miss a lot.
Yeah.
And you may be lucky if you hit the fish or the muscle or the movement fault the first time. So that's why those not just the overhead squat assessment, but split squats, all the fundamental movement patterns can be great diagnostic tools as well.
Yeah.
Right. But the corrective exercise paradigm is by definition starting off with inhibiting overactive muscles, right? And then, working the way to isolating underactive muscles.
Yeah.
Right? And so
and then real quick, the reason why you'd want to isolate in the first place is to really, a couple of things. You want to strengthen the muscle, right? You want to get it used to these motions and movements, but to get that motor skill, right? To be able to be in tune. It's kind of like driving a car. Maybe you turn right for the first time and you hit the curb. And then the next time you almost hit the other car in the other lane, right? But enough times you can do it kind of on instinct and on command to where you just need to develop the habit of doing that exercise. And that's where the isolation exercise, 20 reps, right? 15, whatever that is. It doesn't need to be excessive, but over the course of a couple sessions doing enough isolation, then it's like, okay, yeah, it's not that this is the end all be all, but we need to get the muscle pattern and we need to get you fired up with that. And then we take you back to the compound lifts. So that's where it has a play. It's not just, hey, it's just to feel that burn and feel that pump, Yeah. There's a purpose of getting that mind muscle connection and that motor skill. So
yeah, absolutely. And kind of bringing it back to the low load activation point. Again, this question is, can isolation exercises help fix muscular imbalances? Well, let's give an example, right?
Yeah.
Like let's say through assessing someone while they're squatting, their knees are caving in, right?
Yeah.
That can be indicative of just weak glutes, weak hip abductors, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not just about activating those muscles so you can fatigue them. It's about activating these muscles so that when you do go to the compound movements, you're breaking the pattern of doing it the wrong way. Because currently you're doing your squat, let's say, in a way that your glutes aren't contributing the way they need to. Your outer hips are not contributing the way they need to. So without intervention through an isolated exercise, a targeted isolated exercise, you're just going to keep going down that path.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just about, hey, I'm isolating because I want to build muscle. In this case, it's about isolating because you're trying to retrain your brain, right? Like I use the symbolism of software versus hardware, right?
Yeah.
The hardware is like, oh yeah, this is the raw potential of my muscle, right? The software is your brain and central nervous system even communicating to
Yeah.
that muscle,
Yeah.
right? Like if you cut the power to my house, like just go straight out into my backyard, cut that cord to the generator. If I add another generator, is that going to help if I haven't brought the wires back to the house?
Yeah.
No. So in some cases, you have to go deep, reconnect the wires to certain muscle groups so that they are contributing the way they need to in movement patterns. And the body is meant to move a specific way. So when it doesn't move that way, the joints will be compromised. They will take extra stress.
Yeah.
You know, there's a playbook. We're meant to follow it, and when we don't, we suffer for it. And that's the role of isolation. Now you got
there
me
we go.
doing it.
Yeah.
Isolation exercises. We'll just have to do a compilation of us just screwing up the word isolation. So, Nico, say isolation.
Isolation.
There you go. Okay, so great. Do you have anything more you want to add on that?
No, I think we covered that pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're being honest with me. So, next question is, are compound exercises enough, or do you need isolation movements for optimal results? I would say we've pretty much answered this question, but
Yeah.
let's try, adding
Yeah.
a different flair on this one.
I think they both work in their respect if you train appropriately. And what I mean is like isolation exercises are great only if you take it to that level of intensity of muscle failure, muscle fatigue actually. Not even muscle failure, but enough to stimulate it and then to progressively overload the next week or the next session. But if you're doing the same thing left and right, and you did your workout, your routine that doesn't stimulate, you did that one in high school and it worked back then, right? Well, it doesn't mean it's gonna work now if you don't change those variables.
Yeah.
And same thing with the compound lift. Yeah, you might have hit a heavy lift, but the goal is to progress. Now, it doesn't always mean to go heavier, right? That's one variable, but shorter rest time, right? Time under tension, eccentrics, right? Maybe
Time under
different-
tension, meaning tempo, guys.
Yeah,
So-
tempo.
So if you're going 1, 2, 1, 2, maybe instead you do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which in turn now you're doing 6 seconds versus 4 seconds.
Yeah.
Right? That's a form of strength.
Exactly. The sets versus the reps that are in that. Like, they both work and they both build strength and they both build muscle. It's just, how are you training to do that,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my approach. I mean, like I said, there's a time and place for both. Last year, when I was dead set on feeling the burn, right, I changed to a strength training protocol, 5, 6, max, 8 reps max, and I felt the most muscle activation and most soreness then because I'd never trained like that before. My body adapted to the pump and the isolation exercises. So I kind of knew, like, we know you're going to hit the chest. Then we know you're gonna hit the back with this one. You can change it up, but you're almost always doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? So when you changed it up, like hitting heavy overhead barbell shoulder press, the stimulation is gonna be just enough to where, yeah, that's a strength exercise, but my muscle fibers have never felt that type of load before either. So they're responding on all cylinders for that. So
Yeah. I love it. I'm not even going to answer that question. I'm going to finish it by just kind of, in my opinion, doing a practical guide for compound versus isolation exercises.
yeah.
Going back to the board. So you've got your dry erase board. You've got your exercise selection. We're going in sequential order on the way down. Warm up, whatever, with some cardio. Isolated or low load activation exercises in order to activate the muscles that you need to, whether or not that's because you want the muscular contribution from the burn aesthetic standpoint, or because you have a muscular imbalance you've identified and you need to get it firing. Next, compound exercises, because that's where you're going to get the loudest message. You need to build muscle because your body's exhausted after doing those. So hit those. Anything you felt like you missed, that's where you're going to add isolation exercises at the end.
Yeah.
So you were doing lat pull downs and you felt like you didn't hit your biceps enough, throw some biceps in there.
Yeah.
You felt like you did barbell hip thrust, but you didn't hit your lower back enough, add back extensions, right? That, I think, is a very practical way to break down the differences between compound and isolation exercises in a way that is actionable for everybody here.
Yeah.
And it addresses it whether or not your goal is just to be healthy and functional or looking to build muscle.
That's
All
a
right.
good, yeah. Awesome.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah,
this
no
is
problem.
an awesome, great idea. I really enjoyed this one, and man, we were geared in the whole
Yeah.
time.
I love that. Yeah, as you can see, I can really just kind of get excited and fired up for anything like this. So let's just keep it going, and I'm looking forward for the next podcast with you.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks, ChatGPT.
Thanks, ChatGPT. And your plug, your other guy, your podcast.
Yeah, Dr. Jerry Robles.
Thanks, man.
Of Art of PT, although his podcast is called Art of Wellness. So I don't know, maybe he's rebranding. So thanks, everybody. And thanks, Nico. We can't forget Nico.
Yeah. Thank you, Nico.
And thank you guys.